A few weeks ago, I reviewed the Miy Brick Pro, and actually, it's a device that I rather like, but it's 2026, and at this point, the value proposition of something like a Brick Pro coming in at around about $100 has changed quite considerably. It's not overpriced, not really, when you consider what's put into it, but it is overpriced when you consider it alongside other devices and what you can get out of them. This is the dichotomy that we're living in right now. Buying a retro handheld in 2026 is like playing a platformer where the floor keeps falling away from you. You leap to the next performance tier, but by the time you land, it's already been replaced with a downgraded version and a higher price tag. It's as if the thing that these handhelds are emulating best right now is the 2008 economic recession. And the biggest nostalgia hit that they're delivering is 6 months ago when you could buy an SD card without having to sell a kidney to the highest bidder. You know, the industry is a mess when instead of people investing in Bitcoin, Bitcoin is investing in silicon. And into this arena steps the Mangmi Air Y. This is essentially a Mangmi Air X in terms of power, but in a nice vertical form factor with a 4:3 screen. Sure, they've made some downgrades since the Air X, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But I've got to say, this is essentially what the Brick Pro should have been. And I'm not actually talking about money here. I mean, Mangmi came into this market as disruptors and single-handedly changed our understanding of the word value when it comes to these devices. For around $100, they offered a lozenge-shaped handheld with a 16:9 screen that, whilst it wasn't the perfect device for it, could push users into emulating some PS2 and GameCube games. And with the Air Y, it looks very much like they're trying to do the same thing again, but this time standing up. This base model, which I've got here, has a single stick, a single front-facing speaker, and by the look of it, a single goal, to be the best vertical handheld that it can be, except for its more powerful sibling. Now, they didn't send me a Pro model to review, but Mangmi have said that they'll send one out when the next batch is ready, and I'm going to try to hold them to that, because actually, these two devices could change how we think about retro handhelds as we move into the tail end of the year. And my first impressions of the Air Y are actually very positive. It's got that weight to it, you know, the weight, the one where the plastic doesn't creak like an old wooden floorboard, that weight. It feels remarkably well put together, exactly the sort of size that you would want from a larger 4:3 device. It feels less like a handheld and more like a precision instrument for the conservation of joy. You get the impression holding this thing that if you were to press left on the D-pad whilst facing east, continental drift would accelerate slightly to compensate. But are these initial impressions trying to cash checks that the rest of the device can't afford? Certainly, if you want a device that's really going to get you stuck into GameCube and PS2, then unfortunately, this isn't going to do it. You'd be better off looking at the Retro Pocket Classic or the Anbernic 477V, or maybe the Pro. But we'll have to wait and see when Mangmi sends one over. But if you're really after the sort of power that we've already seen with the Air X, just in a different form factor, then you've come to the right place. And you're going to get a decent price as well. Mangmi are releasing the Air Y on August 12th, and there will be an early bird discount making it $89.99 until the 15th. But even if you miss that, the regular retail price is still going to be $94.99, around the same price as the Brick Pro or the original Air X. The Pro model comes in two different versions with 4GB or 8GB of memory. Personally, and I have to say I haven't seen these units yet, so I can't say for sure, but I can't see the point in getting the 4GB model when $30 more will give you twice the RAM and twice the storage. That 8GB model is going on sale for $175.99 and the regular retail price is $189.99. But like I said, hopefully I'll have more on that in a different video. We do still need to ask whether the downgrades that we've seen over the Air X are going to make a significant difference in performance. Whilst we know that this should play everything Dreamcast and below, will it start to sweat with the higher-end titles? So join me as we ask, is the Mangmi Air Y the answer to your gaming needs, or is Y the question that's stopping you from buying it? And now, a word from our sponsor. Imagine an emergency. Not the kind of emergency where your Ambonix shoulder buttons stop clicking mid-Castlevania, but an actual emergency with fire, police, and ambulance. And now imagine that you're the guy in charge of the whole thing. You have to build your base, populate it with office workers, make sure they have the right facilities like a bathroom, a kitchen, and a fridge, and make sure that Colin takes his lunch break. This is one of the most interesting ideas in simulation games I've seen for quite some time. Global rescue. But this isn't just an HR job, because very soon the calls start coming in, and when they do, the chaos ramps up fast. From serious burglaries to towering infernos, one simple noise complaint can quickly escalate into several incidents, and with no free vehicles, how are you going to deal with it? But the thing I'm most excited about is the map, because you can play this game in any real-world location that you want, with maps constructed from real satellite and map data. If you've always wanted your granny's house to be the centre of the city's rescue services, well, now it can. You'll be protecting the very streets that you know and love in real life. The game features 3 separate emergency services, major incidents where multiple services have to work together, and a challenging call volume that'll keep you on your toes. It's a genuinely fun experience, but you don't have to take my word for it. Early access, the reviews on Steam are brilliant, with a very positive rating. If you think you've got what it takes, then why not try Global Rescue from PDP, published by Aerosoft. The game is in early access on Steam right now for both PC and Mac. Check out the link in the description. Now, I think the Mangmi Air Y is a little bit special. Before I even turned it on, the feel of this thing just made me want to pick it up. It's made of a... Well, I think it's a more premium plastic than the Air X was, and it seems to hum its contentment at a frequency that only well-adjusted furniture can hear. It's certainly a denser unit, and that adds to the feel of the quality. This is a distinctly different beast to the Brick Pro, and whilst both of them give you that premium feeling experience, they tend to do it in slightly different ways. The Brick Pro feels premium like a well-appointed library. The Air Y feels premium like a badger in a smoking jacket who's just offered you a sherry. Coming in at 279 grams, it's actually heavier than both the Brick Pro and the Retroid Pocket Classic, and it doesn't even have the excuse of having an all-glass front. What we're feeling here is the weight of the extra power and the 4.2-inch screen that they've packed into this little device. And they've packed a lot of other stuff in here as well. It's running on the Qualcomm SM6115 processor, according to the manual, which to all intents and purposes is the same Snapdragon 662 chip that we saw in the Air X. Paired with that, you've got 3GB of LPDDR4X RAM, 32GB of internal storage, and a TF card slot. It runs Android 14 and has Wi-Fi 5, Bluetooth 5, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. At the centre of all of this is the 4.2-inch IPS display with a resolution of 1280 by 960, which are pretty good specs on paper, but we'll talk about that more in a bit. You have active cooling, a customizable key, a scroll wheel, and a 5000 mAh battery, which should give you around 5 to 6 hours of mixed gameplay. That's mixed system gameplay, I should say, not some games that you're very good at and others where you can't even control the main character. The D-pad here is actually very similar to the D-pad that was on the Mangmi Air X. It's a main-brain switch and it can feel just a little bit mushy. They've also kept the ice rink style smoothness on the plastic, although it's much less noticeable on the Air Y, and I don't quite have the same reservations as I did with the Air X. Despite that, however, it's quite nice to play on. It does pass the Kirby pancake test, although it's a little bit sensitive to diagonals if you're too heavy-handed. What that means practically, though, is that this is quite a nice D-pad for playing fighting games with, and it's got a nice rock to it for old-school driving games. It's also pretty damn precise if you like a good platformer, though my personal preference would be for a more clicky D-pad instead. The buttons, though, I really like. Okay, there's still membrane switches, but you've got your A and B buttons with convex domes and your X and Y buttons with concave domes, which means that no matter the light level, your thumbs won't need to resort to Google Maps to hit the right one. They've got a bit of a clicky feel to them as well, less so than the original Air X, but they're also quite quiet too, which I do like, and that's one thing you can say about the controls across the system. It's actually quite a quiet handheld, perfect for people whose partners have the hearing of a bat. But even if you're not married to a vampire, these buttons have got a nice travel and they're really comfortable to use. The same is true for the shoulder pads, although That's what I've found, and I've got to say your mileage may vary. I think this is one of the design choices that's going to be very dependent on personal taste. They're actually set into an arch running across the back of the device, with L1 and R1 being independent buttons, and L2 and R2 being joined in the middle of what I can only describe as a pseudo rocker switch, I suppose, although you can press both of them down at the same time. For me, they seem to sit just at the right point where my fingers rest on the device, and they're quite comfortable to use. The one problem with them, of course, is that they are not analog triggers, and I don't think I've seen anybody manage to get analog triggers on a vertical device quite yet. Most people don't even try, so as to where the market is, well, it's pretty much par for the course. A single Hall effect stick caps this off, much like the Hall effect sticks on the Air X, and it's sat at a slightly diagonal to the D-pad, which makes this fairly easy to get to during gameplay. There's a touch of cardinal snapping on the main 4 directions. It's not too bad. It's not going to actually pull you over there, but when you're rotating the stick in a circle, there's a touch of release lag on those cardinal zones, which doesn't happen on the diagonals, I have to say. Having said that, in real-world gaming, you don't really notice this. I suspect that's really because of the systems that you will want to emulate here, because this can handle some 6th-gen games, but it doesn't quite have the controls to handle it. Sitting alongside the left analog stick is not a right analog stick, it's a single speaker, which is front-facing, making it nice and clear. Personally, I like the sound reproduction that they've got here. I loaded up Crazy Taxi to test this one out because it's got that Offspring track right at the opening section, and it sounded rather good. Maybe a little bit too tinny on its own, but once you sit your hands in place, then the sound rounds out a little bit. What you lose, of course, is stereo, and once this does have a 3.5mm headphone jack, I know that's going to be a deal breaker for some people. And actually, unfortunately, the screen might be a bit of a deal breaker as well. Now, I like it. It's a nice 4.2-inch IPS panel running at 1280 by 960, which is actually the same pixel count as the Retroid Pocket Nova, giving you integer scaling for PlayStation, Dreamcast, and N64. And it's not too much smaller than that either. It seems nice and bright, reaching 500 nits, and it's got a really bright, vibrant colours and rich blacks. And whilst it won't stand up against an OLED panel, it's pretty satisfying. I like the size of this. I like the fact that we've got a larger screen. Games look fantastic on it. And so does the front end. Mangmi does have their own game launcher included as well. But this is the same screen that was on the Air Neo Pocket Air Mini, a screen that actually has some ghosting built into the panel. And that's really unfortunate because it seems that not even firmware will be able to exercise this problem. Now, I've never been terribly sensitive to ghosting on screens like this, and I've played through a few levels of Super Mario World here, and I couldn't see the ghosting at all with the naked eye. I did do a camera test, however, and you couldn't quite clearly see the ghosting happening. Now, I should say, it's very difficult to see this on camera because the camera itself will add blur onto a moving screen. This is me playing Super Mario and capturing as best I can at 240 frames a second with a 1/125th shutter speed. It's not quite what you'll see in real life, but it's much closer than a normal video capture. And whilst I can't give you a super accurate number here, a good guesstimate based on what I've seen with this and with the Pocket Air Mini would suggest about a frame's worth of persistence. Now, in real-world terms, that's just at the point where some people are going to find this a problem and others won't notice it at all. For a budget device, I mean, we've seen ghosting that's a lot worse on a lot of other machines. And if this is the sort of thing that's not going to bother you, then I think you're going to have a really nice time with this display. But it's got to be said that if you regularly see dead people, then this might not be the device for you. If, however, you ain't afraid of no ghosting, then you could have a lot of fun with this because under the hood, this has got quite a lot of power with a Snapdragon 662 equivalent chip. And that means you're going to have some fun playing quite a few GameCube and PS2 games. Although we have to deal with the elephant in the massive caveat, because whilst this can touch PS2 and GameCube, you're going to have the same compatibility issues on the Air Y that you had with the Air X. And really that means that only the lighter titles are going to play at acceptable frame rates. I had fun playing Double Dash, for example, but F-Zero GX was only running at about 20 frames a second. Lighter PS2 titles like Alien Hominid, Crash Twinsanity have a chance of running well here, especially if you're using PAL ROMs at 50Hz, but more demanding titles just don't quite have the power. Everything below that, though, everything 5th generation runs pretty well, except, of course, for the usual suspects, the games that are difficult to emulate anyway. And with that emulation comes heat. And I did find that the center of the screen and the back of the device that were actually getting quite warm in my hands. It's not enough to burn you with, but it's the sort of thing that if that puts you off, you are going to notice it. And a good chunk of that heat is sitting right where your fingers lay. It wouldn't be a deal breaker for me, but it is something that you need to know about. The Air Y does also have active cooling as well. On silent, I found the fan took a little bit of time to kick in, and when it did, it reduced the heat. So I've got 3 different fan modes here: silent, balance, and extreme. On extreme, the fan is noticeable, and there's a tiny jet engine-like whine that makes you think the device is about to take off. I ended up putting mine on balance mode, and that seemed to give me the best of both worlds. There is, of course, another problem, which unfortunately extends to some of the 5th gen consoles as well, and that's the lack of a second stick. A big pull of a device like this could be for N64 games because it's definitely powerful enough to take on that catalogue, and yet typically the second stick would be mapped to the C buttons so that it ends up being camera control for things like Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time, for example. Here, you don't have that option, and I almost would have liked them to have made a console without any sticks on at all, which is something I know a lot of people are after. And that would just be really good at playing everything that doesn't need sticks. But actually, this is where I find myself after all of this testing. The Air Y really isn't a device that you should think of for 6th gen consoles. It'll handle some of it, but nowhere near well enough for it to be a great experience across those catalogues. But what it's good at is 5th gen and below. It's actually pretty good at PSP as well. The screen is only 11mm narrower than the original PSP screen. If you don't mind the letterboxing, then this is a great device to play that catalogue on a pocketable vertical device. And it is really good at Dreamcast games as well, giving you more than enough power to push through that catalogue. But there's a major benefit on lower end systems because the chip in this thing is primed for you to be able to play those systems with some added extras: heavier shaders and run ahead, a cut in the input lag, and higher internal resolutions. The sort of options that would make a lower powered device like the Brick Pro bottleneck. But on here, you can have the look and feel that you want for your retro 16-bit gaming. And all of that is coming in at a price point that's comparable to lower powered stuff on the market, which doesn't have such a big screen, which doesn't necessarily have the same power, and doesn't have quite the same quality feel to it. And if that's what you want in a retro gaming handheld, then the Mangmi Air Y really is something that you should pay attention to. That's what I think anyway, and I would love to know what you think in the comments below. And whilst you're down there, don't forget to hit the like button and hit subscribe. And if you'd like to help me making videos like this, then please do sign up to be a paid member on the channel or a paid member over at Patreon. The links are in the description. But until next time, that's it for this particular video, and I've had a really great time with the Mangmi Air Y, and I am definitely going to be interested in seeing what other people do with it. But until then, that's it from this particular video. Thank you ever so much for watching, and why not come and join me next time we enter the Retro Corner. Happy gaming!